It's 20 minutes past 6. You're listening to Kamlesh Parayat on BBC Radio Laughter, all the way through till 8 o'clock now. A review into claims that Britain advised the Indian government when it was planning its raid on the Golden Temple in Amritsar in 1984 has found that military advice was provided, but with limited impact. Official figures put the death toll at 575, but the Foreign Secretary William Hague said other reports suggested that as many as 3,000 people were killed, including pilgrims caught in the crossfire. The inquiry was launched last month after declassified documents were said to have suggested that involvement was there by Margaret Thatcher's government. Mr. Hague explained the extent of British government involvement in a statement to the House of Commons earlier this week.
The documents show that the decision to provide advice was based on an explicit recommendation to ministers that the government should not contemplate assistance beyond the visit of the military advisor, and this was reflected in his instructions. The Cabinet Secretary found no evidence in the files, or from discussion with officials involved, that any other form of UK military assistance, such as equipment or training, was given to the Indian authorities.
Foreign Secretary William Hague speaking in the Commons earlier this week. Well, former Liberal Democrat MP for Leicester South, Paramjit Singh Gill, says the Sikh community here are not reassured by comments that British involvement was limited to advice at an early stage before the attack in 1984. He spoke to Mary Ashby on BBC One's Sunday Politics East Midlands this lunchtime.
I think the revelations came as a shock to Sikhs, both in the UK and across the world. Sikhs are angry and upset, sad. There were shocking revelations. How a UK government could be complicit in providing advice to India to launch an attack on the holiest shrine. And, naturally there's a great deal of upset. It's like if the UK provided advice to attack the Vatican or perhaps a Kaaba in Mecca, it would evoke an enormous reaction. It's wrong on principle, morally wrong, to be advising a foreign country to launch an attack on a holy shrine, regardless of the degree to which that advice is taken on board.
Paramjit Singh Gill, the former Liberal Democrat MP for Leicester South. Well, joining me now is Raj Mann from the chair of the Leicestershire Sikh Alliance, and also John Ashworth, MP for Leicester South. Gentlemen, very good evening. Raj, if I may start with you, clearly the Sikh community do not feel reassured by what was heard. What would you like to see happen now?
Yeah, firstly, just to reiterate what Paramjit Singh just said. This is insulting. This report. The report was too narrow in its time frame from sort of December '83 to June '84. We want to know what the government, the Thatcher-led government, advised and did prior to that date and subsequent to that date as well, because this forms a part of an overall policy by the British government and also by the Indian government as well, who, let's not forget, were actually, responsible for this attack, which was the culmination of decades of peaceful protest. So the inquiry, and I welcome Paul Uppal MP and William Hague saying that there should be some kind of truth and reconciliation process, with a three-way with the Indian High Commission, British government and Sikh groups as well, about the events all around this. So we see this as a beginning.
Sure.
Of a...
Just to clarify one thing, you said years of peaceful process, but of course the Sikh, the Golden Temple, which is obviously the subject of the current topic, was being used as a base, wasn't it, by people who wanted a separate Sikh homeland. So
that's what the Indian government would like us all to believe. But let's remember there was a media blackout around this time. Journalists were held at gunpoint and taken to the border and told to get out of Punjab. So we've only got the Indian version of that. Now our narrative is, and our evidence is, that Sant Janil Singh Bhindranwala, the spiritual leader of these so-called militants, and I would say he's a dissident at the most, he never called for Khalistan. Any independent historian who analyses his speeches, he never called for a separate state. He called for equality, for water rights, farming rights, and he wanted equality, and his protest movement was being quashed. And those militants, or what the Indian government described as militants with rifles, these were just his personal bodyguards for his safety, because prior to that, peaceful protesters were being shot at by helicopters by the Indian government, by the machinery. So this angle about it being held up. I mean, April of that year, 45,000 Sikhs were baptized in the Golden Temple. Everybody was allowed in, everybody was allowed out as well. So these were protesters. It was a culmination of a peaceful...
So you can see that there were people there with weapons in what was actually a very holy place for the Sikh community.
Well, the complex is quite large, and in the Sikh religion, we are allowed to carry weapons for self-defense, and that's what they were there for self-defense. The police and the army were shooting at protesters, and his followers wanted to protect in self-defense. There is no evidence on the spiritual leader, Sant actually, there's no evidence that he's committed any crime, caused any terror, or anything else like that. In fact, prior to that time frame, he handed himself in for arrest once, when he was, there was a warrant out for his arrest, and he was released 7 days later. And he always said, he goes, if there's something, a credible charge to answer for, I will hand myself in. But the way the Indian government...
Well, right, just coming back to the sort of the announcement made by William Hague in the Commons on Tuesday, he said the attack was an utter tragedy, but demands for an apology from the UK weren't warranted, is what he said. Do you think there should be an apology by the British government now?
Well, it would be a pretty empty apology, really. I mean, it would be a good starting point to get the apology, but we want to look at the events of that. We want the truth and a reconciliation. We want a public inquiry, and it's got to be independent, and all the evidence, especially about this narrative that there were militants, we want all that to be exposed, because this was, a legitimate place for those protesters to be in, that they were, elected. They were heads of theology schools, and they were, fighting for more rights. So we want all that out in the open. We want the evidence from our side, from the other side, and we want the British government now to help us with that.
Sure. As I say, also with us is John Ashworth, MP for Leicestershire. John, good evening to you as well. Now, your fellow MP, Liz Kendall, has asked for all documents to be made public so that people can judge for themselves. How can you ensure this happens? I mean, for a start, we don't even know if there are existence of other documents, or do we?
Well, I think they are. I mean, the Foreign Secretary, when he gave his statement, indicated that they were publishing some documents, but there's still other documents that we've not got been able to see. I think we need to look at those other documents. I think there needs to be a fuller inquiry, because I don't think the inquiry that the Cabinet Secretary and the Foreign Secretary have embarked upon has satisfied people, and it hasn't brought the closure on this issue, which many people in the Sikh community quite understandably want. So I think we need a fuller inquiry, and we need all the appropriate paperwork published so people can scrutinise this, because this is such a serious event in Indian history. It's a serious event that we now learn that the UK was involved in it. It's very disappointing, and we need to get to the bottom of this, because I think lots of people, lots of Sikh members of the Leicester community, but to be honest, people from all faiths have been outraged by this, because an attack on a holy place of worship should never be tolerated.
Sure. I mean, I suppose one of the consensus on behalf of some people is that one of the reasons the British government did feel the need to be involved was because it was concerned about the possibility of Sikh militancy perhaps spilling over onto the streets of the UK. Do you buy that, or do you think that was just perhaps an overreaction?
Well, that may well have been the attitude of the government at the time. It wouldn't surprise me when you start going through it. You see that the Tory government at the time decided to ban a Vaisakhi parade in Southall. Now, I love going on the Vaisakhi parades that we have through Leicester, and I just think it was an extraordinary move that they banned it in Southall. But this was the early 80s, and perhaps the government at the time wasn't as sensitive to or have as much understanding of the Sikh faith as perhaps politicians these days do. I don't know, but I certainly think that the government was at the time was acting wrongly, but the key thing is that we need to get all the documents out so we can make a fair judgment.
Sure. Raj, finally, if I can come to you then, I mean, how can you make that happen? Because clearly, from the Sikh perspective here in the UK, that's what you want. You want a wider inquiry. How can you force the government's hand in that?
Well, we have to appeal to their sense of human rights, and it's clear from the documents that they put defence contracts above the human rights at that time, and they very naively, if not probably more sinisterly, believed the Indian government narrative that this was some kind of militant movement when we say it was the contrary. I mean, we've got evidence for this. There's a retired head of Punjab police who in his autobiography has said, we used to dress up as Sikhs, we used to go into Hindu villages, kill non-Sikhs in order to give the movement a bad name. And there's colossal amount of evidence, and the Sikh Council UK have given 4 files to the UK government. At the moment, no one's really studying them, and no one's putting them through scrutiny, and that's what we want, because Sikhs are essentially a peaceful people. We stick up for human rights, we try and ask for equality, and this was all self-defense. So we want a process where all this can be illuminated.
Sure, but I mean, if it doesn't happen, I mean, you say you're appealing to the sense of the British fair play to move this forward. But if the current government decides that this is the end of the matter, will you accept that, or what can you do next?
Absolutely not. I mean, we are absolutely livid. I mean, just to pick out one point, there was a 2009 report, which is from the SAS officer who went and did this recce on the Golden Temple, which goes to show that the Golden Temple wasn't being held up. He was allowed free access there in that, and a white person going in there would have been easily spotted out as some kind of unusual person. But that report, which he submitted, was kept for 25 odd years, and in 2009 it was burnt, destroyed. There's your smoking gun. Things like that. There is some sort of cover-up going on here, and we are very suspicious about the degree of involvement, and we actually think that the British were knowing that this was a culmination of a peaceful protest, and for political purposes, for defence contracts, they supported the terror of the Indian state for doing this, because let's not forget, this happened on Guru Arjan Dev's martyrdom day. That is that he's the founder of the Golden Temple. There were, tens of thousands of pilgrims on that day. Why pick that day and also attack several of that 30-odd other gurdwaras in the area if you're looking for a manhunt for a person that's already willing to submit himself for arrest? This is huge, a huge scandal, and the whole truth needs to come out. This is just a start. The British input is just a small part of this, but we want what the Indian government has done. It started off a domino effect, and it ended up with a Sikh genocide in '84 after Indira Gandhi was assassinated, and even there's operations after that as well, which to root out any religious Sikhs. And there's one quote from Indira Gandhi, where she says to a letter to Margaret Thatcher on the 14th of June, it's the people with the scarf of religion that are most dangerous. This is her attitude towards religious people. We say that it was the government that were worried about the exposure of their corruption being mitigated, being exposed, rather than anything else.
Okay, Raj, we'll have to leave it there. I'm afraid we are out of time, but thank you so much for joining us. That's Raj Mann from the chair of the Leicestershire Sikh Alliance, and also my thanks to John Ashworth, MP for Leicester South. If you have any thoughts you want to share with that on us, then you can phone, text or email me. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you agree with what Raj and John have been saying, or perhaps you feel that now is the time for the Sikh community to move on, or is it just too painful an episode in Sikh history to move on? Your thoughts, please, on Leicester 251 1049 0116 is the code, 251 1049. You can text me on 81333, type the word Leicester, then your message, or you can always drop me an email. It's kamlesh.purohit@bbc.co.uk.
Be part of it. BBC Radio Leicester.